Kurt agreed. The two men talked about the virus. Kurt didn't know how the government could effectively keep people from sneaking county to county. He said that hopefully the great expanses in the western states, coupled with the lack of fast transportation, would at least slow it down. Mark asked him what he intended to do with anyone coming to their county. He explained that it was kind of a catch-22 situation. He would instruct his people to turn anyone approaching the county line away, but if they snuck in on a back road or trail, he wasn't sure of the best course of action. If he arrested them, then he had to put them in jail. If it may be better just to let them pass on through. Mark didn't envy the sheriff's job. The two men chatted about other subjects for a while and then walked back down to Joe's house. The tech was finished, and he and Kurt left. A few minutes later, Jim drove back up to the house. The preacher had agreed to move to Silver Hills. Jim had a truckload of the minister's possessions and asked Mark if he'd help him unload them. As the two men walked outside, Mark realized he hadn't even thought about where to put the minister. I guess we can let him stay in my camper at least for a while, Mark suggested. Abby insisted they move into her house, Jim informed him. When they got to the truck, Mark noticed that a large part of the cargo was fishing equipment. It seemed that Brother Bob, like several of Jesus' disciples, was a fisherman. Mark commented as much, and Jim informed him that he still needed to pull the pastor's boat over. They unloaded the contents of the truck into Abby's garage, and then Jim left to pick up the next load. Mark needed to get some sleep in preparation for his upcoming day with Gunny, so he went home and quickly made his way to bed. When the training began the next morning, Mark felt that Jim might have understated how tough Gunny was being. Mark had what he thought was a first-rate team. Victor was on it, as were three other promising young men who had previously been on guard duty. Gunny had them run, roll, crawl, climb, and jump with their weapons and packs. By the end of the first hour, they were all sucking wind. Then he started telling them how to move as a unit and how to cover each other. Any time it looked as if anyone's attention strayed, Gunny questioned that person and berated him if he couldn't give the correct answer. Mark could see the younger men get upset, but he had already warned them, and none of them lost their cool. When the trainees were finally given a short break, they flocked around Mark. "This is a crock of shit," one of the young guns said. "I understand we need to know this stuff, but he doesn't have to treat us like crap if we don't get it right away." The other young men nodded their heads in agreement. Mark smiled back at them. "Alan, he probably just wants to see if we have any quitters in the group." Mark paused and looked at each man for an instant. "Do we?" The men looked at one another and then slowly shook their heads. "Good," Mark continued. "Now go get some water before the break's over." Gunny continued to quiz the men hard. The old Marine did his best to extract a negative reaction from each man more than once, and Mark couldn't tell if he was happy or disappointed when his best efforts failed. A little before 4 in the afternoon, Gunny had the men do more physical training. It was very difficult, since he'd worked them out hard in the morning and then let them sit in comfortable chairs for the classroom portion, causing their muscles to cool down and tighten up. Mark, even with his disciplined training regimen, felt the pain in his legs as they ran up and down the hill in short rushes with all of their gear on. Mark didn't have to guess how the others were feeling. He could see it on their faces. After they'd run up and down the main subdivision road for what seemed like the 100th time, Gunny took them to one of the empty lots where there was a large puddle. He made the men get down into push-up position, still wearing their packs, in the middle of the puddle. He had them do push-ups, and they were required to put their face into the water when they were down in the down position, but they weren't allowed to put their body on the ground. The old goat called up, down in his best drill instructor voice. If one of the men dropped his weight down into the ground, Gunny was on him like a cat on a mouse, calling him names that would have made the most hardened seaman blush. Then he'd switch his tactics and sympathize with the struggling trainee, telling him he didn't have to take the abuse. The old man was cruel and relentless. He rode them until he got what he wanted. At about 15 minutes of push-ups and humiliation, Alan stood up, cursed at Gunny, and walked off. Gunny spent a few more minutes on the remaining 4 before he dismissed them. He instructed them to report back Friday morning for further training. It was Mark's day to get a shower, and he enjoyed it after the hard training. He was used to running, but wearing a heavy pack and carrying a rifle while doing it elevated the aerobic exercise to almost torture status. He wondered how the women would hold up tomorrow. He didn't see how they would be able to make it. He knew that Jess wouldn't make it. He didn't see how they would be able to make it. No, it was just too bad. She'd have to find out the hard way it wasn't for her. Mark decided he'd try to stop by several times and see how they were doing. After dinner, the family listened to the news and then attended the nightly meeting. Mark noticed that Brother Bob and his wife were there. The only major point of business was about letting the 4 young adults who were heading to Houston stay in Silver Hills until the travel restrictions were lifted. The group voted to let them camp in one of the vacant lots. They could help and become part of the community, but at the first sign of trouble, they would be asked to leave. They were grateful and assured everyone that there would be no trouble. After the meeting, Mark was tired and headed for bed. He encouraged Jess to get a good night's sleep. He thought about warning her more, but decided against it. She told him she was right behind him. He fell asleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow and never felt her come to bed 5 minutes later.